why doesn't this government ask you to come out and take your rightful place? And he answers, if I came out, a lot of innocents will die.
He also said that, see, if I come out, if I step out, these guys who are in power today, probably they would step aside and make way for me. But they will hold a grudge against me for their entire life.
He was always India first. So my national security, my national interest come first. And
that the British, whenever they wanted to negotiate, they wanted to talk, they always spoke with Mahatma Gandhi.
He was a mastermind, so to speak, in varieties of ways. And he, in one letter, he talks that the government of India can try for 7 generations. But Russians will never tell them about me because I have done so much, for them. They hold me in the highest esteem. Vajpayee ji probably met our man. So Vajpayee ji was there, Netaji's portrait came in Parliament only in 1978. The Congress never allowed. So every time we have had a non-Congress government in our country, something positive has happened concerning Subhash Bose. I understood from a former Chief Secretary of Gujarat that Modi ji is, whatever he may say publicly, privately he has soft corner for Netaji.
The Franklin Roosevelt, he says that when you give independence to India is your business, I don't want to meddle with that. But make sure that India stays in the Western orbit. I'm trying to also give one input because I want you to see if there's a connect there. I was reading some of the British documents of pre-independence days, and there is a document where it's documented, where there's a conversation between the American president, Franklin Roosevelt, in 42, with the British ambassador to United States. Right? And the conversation takes place in the White House. And he says something like this, the Franklin Roosevelt, he says that when you give independence to India is your business, I don't want to meddle with that. But make sure that India stays in the Western orbit. Yeah. Now, this is, I think, a very, very major statement.
Yes.
That make sure India stays in the... Something tells me very strongly that installation of Pandit Nehru as the first Prime Minister of India was part of that to keep India in the Western orbit.
That you are right, and it will become clear.
And I feel that to keep Subhash Bose away is also part of the same thing. It's part of the same thing. So if that be so, you see, we make this differentiation between Cold War, America on one side, USSR on one side. But as far as India was concerned, I think there's a tacit understanding between these powers on how to run India,
I'll just
how
answer
to
in
take
a
it forward.
brief line.
And
Then let Anuj take
Subhash Bose is probably part of that strategy, and Nehru is part of that strategy, and the whole Gandhi Parivar is part of that strategy. What do you have to say to that?
I'll just finish it off in a sentence, and then Anuj will link it up with why he didn't come out.
The only one point I want to make, he's beginning to sound like Gumnami Baba. It's exactly what Gumnami Baba detailed actually. Whatever you just said just now. So that's what.
Please elaborate on that.
So he used a term JLN, UK, USA combined. So Jawaharlal Nehru plus UK plus US combined.
Even USSR at that time. Because you see, this alliance, we came into the, let's say, if there's a mafia, okay, mafias tend to divide their territories, right?
Yeah.
They are fighting each other, but as far as their territories, this is my territory, this is your territory, we won't fight amongst each other, we are enemies, but let's be, something like that happened after the Second World War.
After the Second World War, yes.
They divided their territories.
The answer for your this hypothesis, and which is valid, can be found in India's joining the Commonwealth. So when India gains independence or India transfer of power happens, the Congress goes back on 2 of its central promises. The first promise of Congress, or the first demand of Congress, was complete independence by dissociating from the UK.
Purna Swaraj.
Purna Swaraj, complete independence. Congress goes back on that, takes dominion status, accepts dominion status. The second thing that Congress always claimed, that we will not be part of the Commonwealth.
Right.
Overnight, they change their stance and they go and join the Commonwealth. And there is a desperation to join the Commonwealth. Not only join the Commonwealth, but the desperation to join the Commonwealth. And the British also negotiate. They also make some compromises. They make some discounts to get India into Commonwealth. So once India gets into Commonwealth, it's in the Western Allied bloc completely. And by that time, Soviet Union had broken away. And Soviet Union sponsored or inspired communist movement had become the main enemy of the present day Indian government. So the demarcation was clear. So although Pandit Nehru is claiming that we are non-aligned, but he is in the Commonwealth. He is in the Western Bloc. So there he has to unfortunately ask for aid from the US. He has to ask for grains, food grains.
I
India is
know.
going through famines.
Appeal for it.
India doesn't have enough cloth.
Yeah.
So he has to get those things. In UK is the biggest arms supplier. So and it's in their interest, it's in the interest of the allied forces, the Western democracies, to prop up Pandit Nehru, to see that the transition is smooth according to their convenience. But not only that, the power remains in the hands of people who they can negotiate with and talk to. So the tradition followed that the British, whenever they wanted to negotiate, they wanted to talk, they always spoke with Mahatma Gandhi. They never spoke with the revolutionaries. They never spoke with Subhash Bose. They never opened a negotiation with Subhash Bose. They spoke with Gandhi. So whatever the situation was, Gandhi was the preferred person they could talk with. So Pandit Nehru became the displaced Gandhiji in the modern India, in the free India. Gandhiji was not there anymore.
Our man in Delhi.
Our man in Delhi.
But Nehru is being cultivated from 1928, you know. I mean, he's their man from that time. He's being cultivated, definitely. I mean, he moves around in the most elite crowds of England. You know, tell me, one friend that Pandit Nehru has in India. I have been researching friend. I'm not talking of acquaintances. I'm not talking. No, male or female. You tell me one. See, female friend, flippant relationships. I'm not interested in that. I'm talking of a real friendship. Not one single person, either male or female, in India. But you can name 10 or 20 people in England, in the high society, who are good friends of Pandit Nehru, with whom he's relaxed. He's comfortable. He laughs. He can joke. He can share. Not one in India.
That's something
this
which
is
happened.
Something which happened from the time he's gone to Eton.
See, I don't. I mean, I am very critical about Pandit Nehru's role post 1939, after the Second World War started. But even before that, or sometime after that also, I can't overlook that he had a very strong streak of anti-imperialism. So he had an inner disgust for imperialistic traditions. I'll just explain. But he was firmly in relation with the Labour Party in England. So in 1938, just after Subhash Bose comes back to India as President of India, Congress, Pandit Nehru goes to UK, and there he meets Cripps and Attlee at their house. And they have a long conference, and they develop certain kind of proposals as to what could the British offer to India. And part of those offers came back as part of Cripps' proposals, and then which again were repeated in cabinet mission. So a negotiation process was always there. That compromise.
Yeah, but you see, you have to also take into account that, you know, say for instance, Trotsky's party is formed in London, right?
Yeah.
So there's a strong socialist influence in England at that time. There is a whole lot of people who are, you know, leaning towards socialism, towards left and all that. And Pandit Nehru is very comfortable with that crowd. It's not the imperialistic necessarily, you know, what we call.
No, my point is that Labour Party, just because he was comfortable with the Labour Party was not anti-imperialistic. It was not against British Empire.
In their way, but we may be perceiving them as such. I mean, I'm seeing.
So they had interest of Britain in their mind.
Right. So, why don't you add something?
I had like, I mean, I'll take off from where you and Chandrachur left. So, one, like, essentially, you talked about the narratives, you know, the fight narratives. And this is where this question of why he didn't or he couldn't come out should be, you know, taken up. The narrative, like, we have two. Even till today, we are having a wars of narratives, like in India. So, the first narrative is the Gandhian narrative, which is a narrative of the government of India. Modi ji is promoting the same narrative. And that narrative, essentially, when Gandhiji met the viceroy, and he articulated in his cow that the aim of my life is to bring peace for the mankind, and that's what most of our intellectuals, you know, and all the people who support this narrative, they stand for. they are internationalists. So they talk about big things about happening in Western countries. So it's like a very peculiar mindset because it's not concerned with, for example, war crimes being committed in India. Churchill is killing people here, so we don't care. But something happens in Europe, I'm very concerned about it because I'm more closer to them.
Yeah.
My family is also settled there. That's one problem, which is very peculiar to the bureaucrats. They always want to, and in fact, most of them have successfully, relocated the families to the Europe and America. So on one side you have this, and the Netaji streak, as Anuj detailed, he was always India first. So my national security, my national interests come first, and Gandhiji and Gandhiji's accolades are all for the world peace. World peace is a jumla which sells. We all like John Lennon. Somehow your glasses remind me of him. But it's one thing to talk of world peace and sing songs, but we know the world doesn't function like that. It doesn't happen like that. All the countries have to have. The problem with now, I was telling you what we were given to understand that government was in touch with him until 85. So this story goes to the so-called Gumnami Baba. So that he was in India, he was in Ayodhya, and he was Subhash Bose and all that. So of course this question was raised with him: why are you not going out? Why this is not happening? Let me start off by giving you like anecdote. This happened sometime when Morarji Bhai became the prime minister, the first non-Congress government in our country, and the people were in touch with him, and the people who he trusted, and these people know that he was Netaji. So he's sitting with them, and there was a gentleman, Sunil Das, was a revolutionary who lost almost his entire family in the freedom struggle. He was very articulate. He had a paper published in the American Journal of Physical Chemistry back in 20s. Had he pursued that path, he would have, you know, would have done wonderful things to him for his life, for his family. But he suffered a lot because of his family choosing the path of freedom struggle. So he put him a question because he allowed the so-called Baba allowed them to take notes. So these are minutes of discussion available to us. So this is minutes of discussion where Sunil Das puts him this question: why doesn't this government ask you to come out and take your rightful place? And he answers, if I came out, a lot of innocents will die. So that's where it starts. So it's not about the way this question has been couched in, previously, like your way of doing is very, very, very interesting, as it should be, in a very mature way of putting it. But people put it in a very, in a kiddish way. Why was Netaji afraid? It's not about his being afraid or something or the other. He was concerned that if I came out, a lot of innocents would die. He was concerned with his country as a whole. Taking it out from where he left. He went out of the country. His allied forces, and so what we were discussing essentially. Now the problem with this man was that he lost a war and he held the Americans responsible for it. The Americans, had nuked Japan. Otherwise, he would have continued. And the American Air Force attacked the INA. So not only the British. So for him, it was an Anglo-American bloc. So he seeks refuge in Russia, which is given to him. And he goes there, and he's there, and then somehow the Russians realize, and if we believe the so-called Gumnami Baba, he was a much bigger personality than we know him. And he was a mastermind, so to speak, in varieties of ways. And that's where he said, beginning when he was there, and he did not like at all what was happening in India. Our national security was compromised long term. He was thinking 20, 30 years, 40 years. He said the way this transfer of power in India has taken place and the way our security and strategic interests have been compromised, India is going to be in big trouble in near future. And the Cold War would be played out here in India, and it will become hot. And India, being such a poor country, cannot take it. So, and there are multiple reasons, like this, the issue of war crimes, and he thought he was declared a war criminal and was deemed to be war criminal by the other side. So he cannot surface. So what he said was that he began, keeping in mind India's long-term, strategic and other, interest. For example, he was of the opinion that the superpower should keep out of India, and if not in India, they are free to meddle in the affairs, or let's say the other countries other than India, but as far as possible they should be kept out, and it should be in our interest to He said he began cooperating with Russians in the covert operations. So he talks fantastic stuff, talks about is being sent to Korea to settle score with MacArthur, and then he talks about Laos, Vietnam, and all those places. So he was, in a sense, trapped in those circumstances. And when people would ask him, why are you not coming out? He said, my coming out is not in India's national interest. So he would appreciate, so the Mahatma will not use kind of language. my coming out is not in India's national interest. People would suffer, because of me. There would be sanctions on our country. There would be, demands to, hand me over and try me for crimes or whatever. People would resist, and and India is a very poor country. People will suffer because of me.
That was his perception.
So that let me be here. I'm working for the country, but my coming out will not serve the. At the same time, he kept on trying, and it's a subject matter which probably we will, discuss in near future. That he kept trying, but he was never successful. But essentially, the reason why he could not come out because the circumstances were against him. And circumstances were beyond his control, and has to do with what was happening in Europe and America. And he was the only person, only relic of the Second World War who survived.
But don't you think there could be a tacit understanding between government of India and Russia?
We thought about it, but so far we have found no evidence whatsoever to show that he had any understanding. What we can, our
But they have not even released the papers till now, right?
Our understanding is that beginning after Panditji was gone, the government knew where he was. So they were keeping in him good humor. Probably they knew the old man cannot come out. And in that sense, there was an understanding. Before that, there was no understanding. So they were probably keeping in good humor, supporting him maybe in some way, maybe by way of security, because we do see signs of security, around him. But not because he himself is very categoric that he is not in any cahoots with the government because he was very unhappy with them.
No, not him. I'm talking of Russia and India.
No, he doesn't talk about. He talks about his own relationship with Russians at the highest level. I mean, for example, you would find it difficult to believe, but he was talking, for example, Khrushchev, Bulgarian, everybody. He said he sneaks out of India and Khrushchev and I, we go and watch operas. So there's a separate enclosure where Khrushchev and I sit and talk. So he talks about his link to the closest, highest level. And in one letter, he talks that the government of India can try for 7 generations. But Russians will never tell them about me because I have done so much, for them. They hold me in the highest esteem. So he was claiming that he was in a different ball game.
And when did you think he came back to India?
He came back, the date is anything between 1552, but definitely he was around that time he was here. He was here and he chose to be in this part of the country. Where we are sitting, he used to be long because he said, I've seen the Himalayan region like the palm of my hand. So he used to travel everywhere, especially in the Himalayan part. But he remained in this part of the world because it was close to the Nepal border. And because he would, every now and then he would sneak out and he crossed the border from Nepal. And Russians would take him away, and then he used to go to different places. He used to talk about fantastic, thing which God knows. It's a very difficult thing to explain, but so he chose deliberately here, and because from here he could go out and.
Actually, there was another streak in him which made the whole power play redundant for him, meaningless for him. That was the deepening of the religious factor. So he was always into tantra sadhana, practical spirituality, ritualistic, all those things. He was into them. He never talked about them publicly too much, but he was into them. But the new appearance that we see from the notes, the minutes, his letters, his discourse after coming to India, it is in a different magnitude. So his insights, his realization. I mean, when he talks about politics, if you read his letters, when he talks about politics, it seems like it has to come from the highest level of statesmen in the world. And when he talks about religion, it looks like it has to come from somebody who has realized a lot of spiritual insights and gained knowledge, deep inside knowledge. And he was traveling to the mutts, to the Buddhist structures in Tibet, and talking about them. He was describing them just the way he was describing. He was not just saying that I am meeting with the Russian heads of state. He was describing how the palace life was, what exactly was going on, how the gulags operated. Many people say that he stole the idea of gulags and torture from Solzhenitsyn's novel. But the fact is that he was describing the gulags 5 to 10 years before Solzhenitsyn's novels came out.
All came out in 73 or whatever. Yeah.
So all these things and his spirituality, so he was least interested in being a prime minister of India was of no consequence to him. But I mean, at the same breath, he also said that, see, if I come out, if I step out, these guys who are in power today, probably they would step aside and make way for me. But they will hold a grudge against me for their entire life that we had to give up power for him. I don't want that.
So this is one part. Now I would like, because I think we are running close to 12:30 or something. So what I now want to explore is one thing that, you see, all this has happened now in the last few years after the new government has come into power, 2014, that we have got Netaji's statue in India Gate, and we've got this museum in Red Fort, and the islands have been renamed in Andaman and all that. Of course, there's a political motive behind it, that's obvious. But why did it not happen before 2014, even in, say, Vajpayee ji's time? Forget Congress. I mean, I would like you to respond to even this, that why did Congress government never did it? And why even Vajpayee ji's government never did it? And why is this government doing it? This doesn't satisfy me fully that they are only capitalizing on it, which they are, of course. But that's not the complete answer. So I would like you to explore that.
Vajpayee is a problem area because insofar as my understanding goes, Vajpayee probably met our man. So he knew about it, he had a personal connect with it. And Vajpayee ji was talking about Netaji beginning 1960s. Vajpayee ji was also responsible for, just as Modi ji is responsible for such a big honor, so Vajpayee ji was there, Netaji's portrait came in parliament only in 1978.
78.
They did not allow. The Congress never allowed. So
That
Congress,
was during Janata
we should
Party's time.
not even talk about Congress. Congress was never wanted him to be. So that's what. So God knows Vajpayee could not do it. We expected him. Probably Vajpayee felt he will come back to power. Probably he was thinking, once Mukherjee's report is out, we will do something more. But Vajpayee could not do it. So that's be very clear about it. Vajpayee did not do anything. Modi ji, I would say, in his defense, for a start, is that he has this because this is how we function. We keep meeting people, talking to them. I understood from a former Chief Secretary of Gujarat that Modi ji is, whatever he may say publicly, privately he has soft corner for Netaji, and which we saw when he was the Chief Minister of Gujarat. So when people talk of him unveiling statue of Netaji in Rajpath and try to see solely from the which is also correct. He is a politician, so he will think in terms of political benefits. But don't forget that he also unveiled a statue of Netaji in Vadodara, this political constituency, and he also talked about Netaji when he was a Gujarat Chief Minister. So the message was conveyed to him when he was still the Chief Minister and he was still not the Prime Minister candidate. And Modi ji showed interest. And the first meeting, a letter was written by Subhash Bose's family, which we drafted. It was sent to him, and he then gave members of Subhash Bose's family more than 40 minutes or so. And Modi ji was a rock star even when he was in Gujarat Chief Minister. So he showed interest. Now it's a very bit difficult thing to explain because of course he has seen, or we have met him. We were there when the files were released and decision was made. We could talk to him, and he, obviously he has seen the files. He knows. And we understand. We know that government knows that he was sitting here. Netaji was here. They may not say it publicly, but they know it, and it's a very complex problem for them to handle. So there are two ways of looking at it, as I can say indirectly, like two ways. Modi ji, like his predecessors, it could be Morarji Bhai, who tried little bit. Don't forget, every time in our country we have a non-Congress government, something positive has taken place. Beginning with Morarji Bhai, he was talking about Russia, and you were talking about Russia. Indian government never approached Russians privately. They did, but officially, for the first time, the approach was made when VP Singh was the Prime Minister. So every time we have had a non-Congress government in our country, something positive has happened concerning Subhash Bose. So probably they have, and of course they have seen the files, Prime Minister NS at least, and they are of the opinion that nothing more can be done. It cannot be brought out because the problems, and you bring out a relic of Second World War, and we have these new realities, strategic relations with Americans, with Israelis, and Chinese threat, and you bring out and make a hero out of somebody who was from that part of the world and he was linked to Hitler and all that. It might cause bad blood with the Americans and Israelis in particular. We are very close to both of them now. So we cannot do it, but at the same time, to keep his conscience clear. And Modi ji will say, okay, I cannot do this thing, but I will at least I'll end up doing a lot of other things nobody has done. So at least my conscience is clear. So he's taking these steps. So that's one way of putting at it. The other way was that he's testing waters by every incrementally he's raising, his stakes, and maybe he's doing it. I remember talking to somebody, the system, and he was just having just like you and me, and he was throwing off his ideas to me. He said, look, Article 370 was on our, on a radar for last 50 odd years. Don't forget, I mean, he said, even Vajpayee wanted to get rid of it, but he could not. There was situation was not conducive. Even Modi ji has taken about 6-7 years to do it. So sometimes ऐसा होता है ना कि आपके पास हथौड़ा तो है, मारना है आपने हथौड़ा, लेकिन लोहा गर्म नहीं होता. अब लोहा गर्म कुछ और कारणों से होगा, हथौड़ा मैंने नहीं रखा हुआ. तो जैसे ही मामला गर्म हुआ, इन्होंने हथौड़ा मार दिया. 370 हट गया झटके में. It took them 6 years. He said कि this matter has brought to our notice only fairly recently. So give us some time. So that's how. So these are two broad areas, ways of looking at it. Either they will not cross a certain limit, but they will do something else. Like this statue is a big thing actually for us. It has a great significance. And the other way of it, they are probably waiting for the right opportunity at the right time. So we are caught in between these two extremes.
Because you have to appreciate the fact कि full disclosure का impact क्या होगा. So we, from the point of our transfer of power, we have our establishment, political powers, they have built up this narrative of India, which you referred to at the very beginning, of Gandhi being at the center, and it's a Gandhian narrative that we are peace-loving, non-violent people.
People seeking peace for the mankind. I mean, we are not just limited to India. चाहे यहाँ पे अपने खाने को पेट में रोटी होना हो, घर में पानी आए ना है, लेकिन दुनिया में शांति हम लेकर आएंगे. So that's the ideal.
That is, we are friendly to the Western powers, and we don't want to annoy anyone. For us, global moral issues hold more importance than our own national interest. So ये and this has helped a whole generation, not only generation, but generation after generation of people who have been in power to settle themselves very affluently in the country, outside the country, abroad, in our friendly countries. So it is a very, nice hunky-dory relationship, a very feel-good kind of thing that we are good people, you are also good people, we know. So let's be friends and all. So an equilibrium has been reached, and that has been maintained due to the dominance of a particular segment of bureaucrats and politicians. Right. And that practice has become inherent. It is in our inherent nature. So anybody who comes up, anybody who gains affluence, they look at abroad. I mean, India is fine, but unless they have a home abroad, somewhere in the US or in UK, or they can brag that, oh, I just spent 2 months in London, So all those kind of things that to show their link and power and everything. Whenever a crook gets caught in a country, he runs away to England. So these linkages and how this was built, and all the people who created this edifice, all 75 years of that story will crumble. And a lot of figures who are revered now will turn out to be villains of the story. And when that is combined with the story of a man who sacrificed his entire life for the benefit of the country and lived under such hardship, when these two are put together side by side, the repercussion, the massive public reaction, nobody can predict what form it will take. So this is something which we always keep in mind. We don't take it lightly. When we were at the beginning, at the starting phase of our transparency campaign under the Right to Information Act, and we challenged the Home Ministry and they refused to divulge the documents, saying the Home Secretary wrote a confidential letter to the Chief Information Commissioner saying that if we make public all documents related to Netaji, there will be massive repercussion. There will be a law and order problems throughout the country, especially in Bengal, and our relations with foreign countries will be spoiled. And these are serious words coming from one of the most powerful bureaucrats. I mean, he knows what he's talking about. He's not talking off his hat.
And this was in which?
This was in 2007.
But subsequently things were released.
But not everything is released.
From the day one,
You've been able to see it officially?
No, we have been able to see, but the thing is that what we wanted from the day one, this entire issue of Netaji's mystery is in the remit of intelligence agencies. So we have been from the day when our demand was to release the intelligence files first.
Right.
So the government has released the PMO. These are all on
The
sundry
non-controversial files.
no intelligence files.
No,
have
but
been
the
released.
other files, even you have not been able to see. Okay. Okay.
Whatever they have released, they have seen that.
Right.
But the other intelligence files, which of course we have not seen. Of course, how can we see something which is classified?
They don't even acknowledge their existence.
Right. Oh.
Which is a standard practice other countries
You can
also, that
either
you don't
confirm or
even
deny.
you don't even and you tell lies, that we can have a separate session on it. They will give out, but you can make out. I mean, I would maybe if we get time in the presentation, somebody did ask me this question in America that I said I have to borrow something from Donald Rumsfeld. So there are known knowns, known unknown, and unknown. So even the Netaji files can be put in these three categories. Known files. So what Modi ji has released are the known files. Then there are known unknown files. So for example, we know there are 77 files of the IB whose description we know, but they are not in public domain. And then there's a third category of the unknown. So these are files, I mean, you can make out if when the so-called Gumnami Baba dies, the American CIA takes note of it. So am I to assume that the IB was sleeping? No, they were, of course, but so they must have been recorded. So these are the things. So we have only the first category of known files have been released, but the known unknown and the unknown files have not been touched, and it's purely on the government's whims and fancies. And another thing which has made our job very difficult is the issue you must have understood by now. It's fairly complex. It's something which is cannot be readily understood, especially when
There is no 2-minute answer to.
not a two-minute answer, in a standard way of discussion, debating, as it happens in the media these days. You're supposed to answer in 2 lines for everything. No, it cannot be, the whole story cannot be unraveled.
And it's complex.
It's
I mean,
very
there are so
fairly
many
complex.
nuanced.
Yep.
This thing.